I have never like talked about any of the stuff I use publicly.
This is basically your role now, really, isn't it? You know,
Well, maybe
you
we'll
are.
find out in a minute, Tom. We'll find out.
Yeah, let's get into it. Come on, let's do it. Right.
Don't spoil it, mate. Don't spoil it.
Hello and welcome to SEO Is Not Voodoo. For many, SEO is still a dark art. So I thought I'd invite some of my brightest minds of SEO to help us all understand it a little bit better, I hope. Joining me today, I have Jack Chambers-Ward, a personal friend of mine from Candor Agency in Norwich, and we're going to be talking everything about SEO. Jack, the premise of this is I'm going to ask you a set of questions which I'm going to ask everybody, and hopefully you can give us some insight into this voodoo known as SEO.
I appreciated the brightest minds that like shine the light on the dark arts, right? You kind of got the light and dark vibe going on there. I appreciate it.
No problem. Now, talking about you, you are now a full-time marketer for Candor now. So you had your recent Candor anniversary. So you've been at Candor now for how long?
So the work anniversary comes up in about a month's time at time of recording officially. But what I shared recently was the time that Mark Williams-Cook, our SEO director, reached out to me on LinkedIn, DM'd me, and basically hired me without seeing my CV or like doing anything very officially. He was like, "Hey, man, listen to your film podcast. I think Predator 2 is quite good, actually. Let's talk about an SEO role if you're interested." And I was like, what a weird conversation this is. And somehow the podcast I've been doing with my mate for the last, 4 years or so turns into getting a job offer that is now become such a huge part of my life and the best job I've ever done and made so many friends and connections and all this kind of stuff. It's been a weird journey. And yeah, officially my title is Marketing and Partnerships Manager now. It's been about, I want to say about 18 months since I made that switch. And I was very much, what we talked about, funny enough, when you were on Search with Candor a couple of years ago, Tom, a SEO kind of generalist. I was leading some accounts. I was doing a lot of client work and all that kind of stuff, but also doing the podcast in the background and kind of keeping that ticking over and stuff. And now we're very much focusing on marketing Candor as a brand, promoting us outside of, the fact that I mentioned Mark Williams-Cook. If you've heard of me, you've heard of Mark because he's a very, very big deal in the SEO industry. And most people will look at your name badge at a conference and go, Candor, like Mark Williams-Cook. Oh, yeah, I know Mark. Yeah. Oh, I follow him on LinkedIn. He does great SEO tips. I'm like, yeah, that's how everyone knows Candor pretty much. Some people know also our tool as well, which is nice.
Yes.
But yeah, for me, it's been that transition of I'm now like writing our client case studies. I'm now working on all of our like partnerships for our newsletter, Core Updates, our newsletter that we launched beginning of last year has just crossed 10,000 subscribers, which is insane. Blew my mind. And yeah, that's my job. Like every Monday is writing that and working it out with Mark and picking out all the best news and all that kind of stuff. And also all the editing of the podcast stuff.
Now, let's be honest, Jack. So Mark's not going to listen to us. He's too busy. He's too busy just
not a chance
being in the brain of Google, right? So you say that, most people know Mark, but last 12, 18 months, let's be honest, the name of Jack Chambers-Ward maybe getting up there in terms of, let's be honest, let's not be around the bush here. That kind of famous unanimity with the Candor brand. I'm just saying, I think there might be an argument now to say you're more famous than Mark.
I'm definitely that other guy at Candor, that's for sure. Oh yeah, you're the other guy with strangely, the double-barreled 3-syllable surname, which is a weird coincidence.
Yeah, that is a weird coincidence.
Yeah, it's Mark Williams-Cook and Jack Chambers-Ward. It's like, I didn't do that on purpose. My wife and I decided that before I started working at Candor, but it did happen while I was working at Candor. I was hired as Jack Chambers and now I'm Jack Chambers-Ward.
Oh, that's weird.
That's kind of weird. I didn't even think about that. And now I feel like, am I just copying Mark? Like, does this look a bit weird?
Or will you? Let's someone say you'll overtake Mark. No one will remember Mark's name. Give it 2,
exactly.
3
Yeah,
years.
that's my goal. Just usurp the throne of SEO.
So you say that Mark messaged you and it was based on your podcast. It wasn't necessarily because I was doing some digging because you were a food and drink catering assistant at Norwich City Football Club. Which, by the way, I found very interesting because what you put in your description for that was that you prepared food and drinks under pressure. But then I realized you were only there a month. So was the pressure just too
Correct.
much?
It was a temp job for the record. So it was through a recruitment agency and I just did like a summers helping out or whatever. And I'm not a football guy, never have been, never will be. And I think that was fairly evident from my work at Norwich City Football Club. I made bad coffees, mediocre teas, and handed out lukewarm room temperature pies. And nobody had a good time, let alone me, let alone the people eating the pies and drinking the tea. So not my finest hour, shall we say, Tom?
You don't worry, you found a lane. You got there eventually. You found a lane. You know, you're where you belong now.
There is some weird, like, primer style timeline connective tissue of like, from me basically like throwing a pie at a bloke 20 years ago to being on this podcast with you now.
And now the journey is complete. Exactly. We've already talked about podcasting. Podcasting is obviously a massive passion for you. We actually talked about it on a little bit of a preamble before we started recording. You know, you've been podcasting forever. It seems not just obviously with Candor, but with your own podcast as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's a thing. I think I surprised a lot of people. I've been podcasting longer than I've been in marketing.
Yeah.
And because I think a lot of people, especially when you see like SEO podcasts or marketing podcasts, it's typically a marketer or an SEO who then wants to have their opinion heard or interview people or whatever. It's the kind of the secondary thing, right? But I started off recording like comic book news and pop culture stuff. I was working it was a side job I had while I was at university, working for a website called wordofthenerdonline.com. I don't think it's around anymore, unfortunately.
Sadly.
But I know, right? Yeah. And I ended up because I was 19 at the time, I was able to stay up until like 2 o'clock in the morning and record with my US and North American co-hosts. So weirdly enough, it ended up being a pretty trial by fire kind of thing of like, we're just going to review this week's podcast, comics, and talk about whatever's being released, superhero movies or whatever. That then kind of spun off. I ended up doing a video game podcast there as well. One of the guys, my former co-host of The Gamer's Word, funnily enough, came to my wedding a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
still buddies with my Canadian mate Sean, and we hang out whenever we're in each other's countries and stuff. I was like, I forget you're part of my podcast origin. So I've told our friendship story on other podcasts so many times. This is so weird. So yeah, it's been 16 years later this year for me since I started podcasting. It's 2009 when I started. That was my first year of uni. So yeah.
This is why I think our stories, this is why I connect with you so much, Jack, because you're very similar to me in the fact that I started my time not in the marketing world, but in the radio world. So I used to do radio before I went into marketing.
Yeah.
Yes. So you obviously started in the podcast world, and then we both ended up in marketing.
If I remember your origin story, let me see if I can remember this from, I think it's like 2.5 years since that episode. It's like early 2023, because I remember we were talking about, funny enough, we're talking about Google I.O., because you had Mark on the Punkcast talking about Google I.O., which we've just had at time of recording. And you said something like you went out for drinks, got a bit too drunk, and agreed to go on a podcast and to go on the radio, just like because they thought like, oh, you've got a cool voice, Tom can talk, that'll be fine. And then you got an angry phone call at like 5 o'clock the next morning. Be like, where are you? What's going on? You said you'd host this radio show with me. Something
Correct.
like that.
The story goes that I'd had a bad day at university. I got drunk, and they were launching a radio station that week.
That was it.
Yeah. And they were all out partying and celebrating. So and then someone came. These are in the days where I was much more attractive, and actually, people liked me. So someone came up to me, a female came up to me and was trying to talk to me, and I had no interest not because of the person, because I was in a bad mood, and she bless her, she wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer. So I was basically taking the mick out of her. And the main host of the breakfast show was sat next to me at this time and was finding this very, very entertaining. So yeah, said, oh, you should come on, you should host the breakfast show with me. We're starting in the morning, which this is a conversation that I have no recollection, and people have filled in the gaps of this part for me. The bit I do remember is the phone ringing at 5:30 the next morning saying, you agreed that you would be here and you are not here. And so I had to drag myself out. And I started my radio career from that, as you do. Sadly, my route into marketing and SEO was not as exciting as that. That was much more traditional, but yeah, that was my route into radio.
That's a good way to get a job. Like, I feel like there is a weird parallel between me talking bad about Predator 2 and you getting drunk at a pub and being asked to start a morning show the next day.
Precisely. Yeah, precisely. To quote my favorite artist, we're all going to hell, but we'll have the best stories to tell. So
Exactly.
let's get into the questions. I'm gonna face you with 6 questions and talk about to unravel this world of SEO, and hopefully we can get to the bottom of it. So, question number 1: what's the one aspect of SEO that you in particular are most passionate about, and why?
I feel like it's a cheesy answer. It's kind of doing this. It's the educational side of things. Yeah. It's sharing stories and having discussions, and it's the community.
Yeah.
Really, it's the community side of things. Like, when I was in my previous agency before I came to Candor, it was a very competitive nature where don't talk to other agency owners, don't talk to anyone else. Everyone's a competitor. They're trying to steal our leads. They're trying to steal our clients, all that kind of stuff. And I remember joining Candor, and the big reason obviously I joined Candor was, oh look, the work culture is healthy and everybody seems friendly and stuff. Like, and remember having a conversation, a guy, one of my closest colleagues at the previous agency was fired on the spot because he was doing freelance work on the side, and they just not discussed that. And we had a big conversation about, is that in your contract? Is that allowed? How does that work legally? Whatever. Apparently, and this is all said in the break room afterwards kind of stuff, the boss called him during work hours when he was logged into the actual work system, and he answered his freelance phone as if my boss was a client. And he was like, yeah, you can't do that, mate. I've caught you. Off you go. So I was in this weird situation. I was like the last man standing in that digital marketing team by the time I was there. And I remember having this conversation with Mark, and without me even prompting, in the interview, Mark was like, oh, if you do freelance stuff, I know a lot of people do that, as long as it's not literally competing with us, we're not working for local solicitors and you're working for the other local solicitors or anything like that, or really it's about budget. And I think that is the most realistic way of thinking about it. When we're thinking about how we can all work together, and I know, again, we talked about this and how collaborative SEO can be last time we spoke as well, working with freelancers, working with smaller companies and bringing them in as part of a larger agency or an in-house team and all this kind of stuff. Not everyone's competition. We can all do better work if we work together. And that's something I've really learned from going to conferences and being a host of a podcast for the last 2.5 years. There's that element of all the friends I've made along the way through this podcast, through doing Search with Candor, through being a guest on shows like SEO Is Not Voodoo. There's all this nice kind of conversations we have where you end up going for drinks later or hanging out or get a job offer or whatever. It's that networking community kind of thing that I think, as cheesy as it sounds, it's all that kind of soft skill kind of stuff, right? And again, I know that's something you're very passionate about. There's always that element of, you can be the smartest person in the room and you can know your SEO stuff front to back and all that kind of stuff. But if you're not nice to work with, people might not want to work with you. So yeah, I try to be as nice to work with as I can, basically.
I do the same. I couldn't agree with you more. I do the same. But I remember that, there used to be a when I first started in this industry, there was this idea that the SEO community, and I remember speaking to another sort of colleague in the community, they used to say that it used to be the case that we'd all have this little secret. And actually, this is what it sort of inspired. Yeah. It's a nice first question because it kind of inspired this show, which was there used to be this idea that you had the secret. If you had the secret sauce to SEO and you were doing a great job, then you kind of locked it away in the back room and never told anybody, and you'd only use it for your clients, etc. But that's just the complete opposite now, because the community is so open, and that has its downsides because you can hear some rubbish that comes out.
There's plenty of misinformation and stuff going around, right? Absolutely.
Exactly, especially from idiots on TikTok and Instagram. Those guys.
I had I think the closest I've ever come to getting fired from Candor, I was winding up Mark by sending him bad TikTok SEO tips And I was like, ha ha, being a bit of a joke. And he was like, no, dude, this is actually really annoying. Stop doing it. There's a reason I'm not on TikTok. I was like, okay, the tone has changed now. Like, he's a
I
friend. He's also
appreciate you
my
sharing
boss.
my
I was
video.
like,
But no, it's that thing. We're now really open and we do talk to each other in a much better way. And there's, I know I'm not a big part of this, but the big expos like Brighton and the things like that are a big part of that, because we can literally get together and start having these conversations, or being a part of this, etc. So
I think you and I have been saying we were going to have a drink together for the last 2 years, Tom. Like, yeah, and then you've gone and had a kid and stuff.
child,
and
exactly.
Too busy.
Well, do you know what? I was literally talking to this. I was sat in front of my team before saying, because I've just I don't know, there's a new one that's about to start that I've just bought a ticket for, Mersey Search, which is just up the road from us.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, they
That's
invited me.
Joe O'Reilly and Nat Slater, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
precisely. Who I know both really, really well. Yeah, they're great. They're amazing. And so they invited me and they put me on the WhatsApp chat, and I was like, yeah, this all sounds great and amazing. But it's like getting my time to do it is really, really difficult. So I said, don't worry, I'll send my best guys. Let's just send them out to go and do. But it's good for them as well. It's like I now think of my team and the exposure, and it's not just all about sitting there in front of the screen and learning and doing. It's actually about getting out there and talking to people, because that's some of the best ways to learn about this industry, is just by developing those relationships and sharing ideas that way. So I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to conferences and stuff, I find you either like go to learn new things, and a lot of times you're going to reaffirm an existing theory, or like, I've been trying that with the client. Am I going mad? Does that work? And you hear somebody who is, well respected and you followed or whatever, and they do a talk and they mention like, yes, this is the correct strategy for what I would do for an e-commerce client. You're like, hell yeah, that is a good idea. Yeah, I am doing the right thing. I'm not going crazy. And you get that nice, even without the one-to-one interaction, there's so many other elements to it that you can get, like you said, that positive reinforcement. Even if you just send a team member and you hear back from, plenty of the Candor team here have also gone to Brighton and other conferences. Our head of search, Tabby, recently spoke at Hive MCR in Manchester. And it's like just hearing back about all these different events and conferences and stuff. And we all split off and do our own thing and feed back to each other and being like, well, there's no point sending 3 people on that track and 3 people on that track, all split up and go to 6 different tracks. And I went to Barcelona last year, Mark's in Turkey and Croatia and all kinds of stuff. And yeah, I think there's a real nice international feel to it as well at the moment, which is nice. Even if you're stuck like you and I often are, Tom, of like, I can't go further than down the road at the moment. I'm a bit too busy.
Exactly, precisely that. It's so difficult. Question number 2. With the ever-evolving search landscape, what's the one fundamental aspect of SEO that remains a constant, do you think?
Oh, that's a big question, especially with all the horrifying AI mode stuff that's been discussed recently.
It's the worst timed question at the moment.
I know, right? Yeah, no pressure. Like, I'll ask you this question when perhaps the biggest shift in the history of SEO is happening.
There's just been an earthquake, and now I'm going to ask you this question. Yeah, precisely.
And how would you build a house? I was like, funny enough, very briefly, I was in an earthquake a few weeks ago in Turkey.
My goodness.
So that was fun. It wasn't serious, thank God, but it was an experience nonetheless. But for me, it is paying attention to your audience. It's I think, again, something we talked about previously, something I feel like I talk about with almost anybody who is really doing good work in SEO or marketing in general. I feel like we've come full circle and almost back round to a lot of the really fundamental marketing 101 stuff. Yeah. We got into this habit of like the success of all the niche sites and all the like super black hatty stuff and, link spamming and all this kind of stuff. And it feels like, especially with all the conversations, if Google is, talking the talk and walking the walk and all that kind of thing, we're back around to a lot of like really fundamental psychology of human behavior type stuff and how that works. So understanding the kind of people that want to buy your product, the kind of people that might be interested in your service or reading your articles or whatever it is, it's really often that simple. And it amazes me how many people have really no idea, apart from some hypothetical persona thing that some person, some consultant was brought in to do on a Tuesday afternoon. There's a little like stick man scribble on a whiteboard in a corner of a meeting room somewhere. It's like, that's not your audience. That's a stick man in the corner. That doesn't count. Dave from accounting is not necessarily the persona. Like, that's not how that works. But actually understanding what platforms people are using something. I know this is a tool a lot of people have been shouting out on Search with Candor recently. Something like SparkToro, not sponsored, not paid by them or anything like that. But it's audience research stuff. And it tells you literally like, I want to market to marketing managers in Norfolk, being the example, obviously. And they find out like, oh, they tend to be very active on LinkedIn and TikTok. They're into board games and football and this and blah, blah, blah. And you get such a interesting scope of the platforms that they're on, the things that they're talking about, the subjects that they're talking about, the other topics. What is, there's, I don't know if you've ever seen those like almost like Facebook autocomplete t-shirts where it's like,
Yes.
I'm a 34-year-old cat dad who gets grumpy in the morning when he hasn't had his coffee, but my wife loves me anyway, or something like that. It's, each line is in a different font, and so many people freak out. Exactly, yeah, do like a Superman style reveal.
Yeah.
And then you get that element of people being like, oh, my phone's listening to me and knows exactly what we're talking about. It's like, or you've been giving away your data to everything you've been doing on the internet for the last 25 years and you kind of forgot about it. So it knows everything about you already, whether it knows all of your Instagram likes and saves and DMs and Facebook likes and WhatsApp messages. That's all Meta. People forget WhatsApp is part of Meta, but it is. And Google has been talking about this as well. The personalization and context is going to be more important than ever. So understanding actual human behavior, not a broad concept of an audience, but an actual human being, can be pretty difficult to actually nail it down. But if we're going to see personalized search, we're going to see things where your search results are different to mine because your Gmail inbox is different to mine. Your habit in Google Docs, your habit on Google Maps, your habit in Google Books, whatever other parts of the Google ecosystem they tie into it. So far, only, I believe only the Gmail side of things is confirmed. Mm-hmm. But why would they not take advantage of one of the biggest tech ecosystems in the world, right? For me, it's a whole other subject. I apologize. Welcome to Tangents with Jack and my ADHD brain. But
which is
that's the biggest.
I think needs to be a bit of a spin-off podcast.
I mean, that's Search with Candor half the time, mate. Google has the advantage of that ecosystem, unlike basically any other company in the world. The only other one really is Apple, and they don't have a search engine. They don't have YouTube. They don't have a bunch of other stuff. There is nothing like the Alphabet Google family of apps and products. And if it is personalizing SERPs based on your YouTube searches, your YouTube creations, like the fact that I'm now a YouTube creator through the Candor YouTube channel and stuff like that, that will blow my mind. So being aware of the actual human beings on the other side of it is still fundamentally true. I think it's still so key to marketing, so key to SEO, and has been for hundreds of years. Like ever since we started communicating with each other, there's been marketing.
And it's so true. And you're absolutely right. But it's not, if you think of, we were just talking about the conversations and the sharing of knowledge within the SEO community. I feel it's one of the things that, is not really talked about because we love talking about technical SEO because we're all massive nerds and geeks, and, we love talking about content because, some of us love content, but we don't necessarily talk about the psychology aspect of it. We might talk about keyword research. Oh, crikey. I mean, to death.
Keyword research is psychological research, whether you realize it or not. That's absolutely what that is.
But it scratched the surface of really what that
exactly
that is. There's a whole mountain layer underneath that I completely agree with you needs to be understood and is often forgot about as not part of the conversation. And I suppose this falls into my next question: is that the thing that differentiates the great SEO from the good SEO, or is there something else that differentiates the great and the good?
I think that's definitely part of it. But Mark said a really interesting thing to me on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. That was when you get to a certain level of SEO knowledge, like you said, this is the pushing from good to great kind of conversation. I think this is true pretty much in everything that requires effort. Career, sports, relationships, whatever it is. Like that push from 70%, like, oh, you're above average, you're pretty good, to being the 90, 95%. 90 to 95% is often harder than 0 to 70, right? You're pushing that, you're getting momentum, all that kind of thing. But that last little bit to really, really stand out can be the hardest thing to do. And I think paying attention to your audience, being aware of human psychology and stuff. I'll give a shout out to brilliant speaker Sarah Picorna, friend of mine, who does a load of like psychology. She's been studying psychology, has I think multiple degrees in masters and all that kind of stuff in psychology, and does really interesting psychology of search stuff. However, that little bit, for me, it's when you have the confidence to say when you don't know something. Because I have totally been guilty of this throughout the early stages of my career. Before I felt confident enough, I would be like, I don't know, a client was like, why do you think this page is underperforming? And that's not a page I had looked at in the performance report in Search Console or had been filtering for in GA, it was Universal Analytics at the time, but GA4 now. Like, I haven't looked at that page in 6 months. I have no idea. It's like, probably the user experience is worse on that page. Like, I am making that up to sound smart and impress nobody. Well, who am I trying to impress? I'm lying to the client here. Like, lying is a strong word. We fudge numbers, all that kind of stuff. That's part of human nature. That, you know, we're not just going to be completely open and honest 100% of the time. But saying, I don't know, I'll look into that, is so much more powerful and reassuring for me as somebody who has been a client and somebody who has worked with other agencies and, you know, speaking to my colleagues who do a lot more client work than I do. Hearing somebody I really respect say like, oh, I don't know, but I'll look into that. And tying back into the community side of things, there are so many conversations I've had with clients where I come back and plenty of people I know will go and be like, well, I shared it on LinkedIn and John from Google said it's this, or, you know, Mike King or Aleda Solis or Lily Ray or, God forbid, Mark Williams Cook would comment and say, actually, I think it's this. Oh, I've experienced this before. This might be a bug in this. Or last time I checked, this was the guidance according to this. It's that community side of things, because it's okay not to know everything. This is, again, pretty much what we talked about when we were discussing ourselves as generalists, right, on Search with Candor. Having that 60, 70% across a bunch of different stuff is great. And being able to, like we said, dip your toes in, be aware, have that bigger picture kind of perspective. But if you really, really want to kind of prove yourself, I think being aware of what you know and what you don't know and being comfortable enough to communicate that to people, whether that's colleagues, especially clients, I think in terms of agency side things, or your bosses. Like, say, for example, you're working in-house and you work with the marketing manager, you report directly to the marketing manager, and the CMO or the CEO is like, right, time for a report, junior marketing person, get into my office. You've never met the person before in their life, and then you have to have that conversation. It's way better to be like, actually, I don't know the answer to that question, but I can go and find it out for you.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more. And it's, I'm going to ask this question in a second as well, but it's so true that actually the ability to be that vulnerable, and this again goes across not just this industry, but in so many industries and many parts of life, actually, the ability to be that vulnerable, to be able to say, do you know what? I don't know, but just give me a second and I'm going to go away and I'm going to find out. And from
I think I know someone who might know, right? Like that kind of thing.
Exactly. And that's okay to say. And it's absolutely fine. And you got it spot on, which is the other person on the other side of that, who's typically a client, is actually going to look at that in a better light. So they're not going to expect you to know everything. If they do, then something is wrong. Typically,
well, you've set very high expectations.
You set exactly, which are never going to be met. So
I've had that in an agency before. That's for sure.
I think we've all been, I think we've all been there. You know, where those expectations have been set and they were just completely unachievable. So you've just set yourself up complete failure. So absolutely, I think that's a fantastic answer. I love that answer because it's so true and so right. What's the biggest misconception you think there is about SEO at the moment?
That the goal is to rank number one. Because
And that's so more
again,
true than ever at the moment. Yeah, exactly.
tell me about it, mate. Right? Yeah, exactly. Like I'm guessing by the end of the year we will have AI mode here in the UK
Yeah.
because AI overviews and a lot of the other recent SERP updates have taken like 2 or 3, 4 months ish to kind of pull through after they launch in the US because US gets all the fun first. And I think that is true now more than ever. And I still see people doing the whole bragging on LinkedIn or Be Blue Sky or whatever it is. Oh yeah, I'm outranking this person or I'm outranking that person. It's like, cool. How much money are you making for your clients from that? And what KPIs do your clients even have outside of get me more traffic? Sometimes a client will have that goal. You probably need to sit down with them and have a business strategy conversation about it because that probably should be a business goal. And whether it is brand awareness or more money or building more partnerships or connections or whatever it is, it's almost never the final goal. And I find so many people focus on rank tracking. I was talking to Chris Green from Talk Partnership the other day, and I shared my thoughts on the whole, like, well, this is the end of rank tracking with personalized SERPs, right? It's like, oh God, I have tried to map like minute to minute, hour by hour SERP volatility in ranking before, and it drove me absolutely insane for 3 days straight. I'm like, yeah, don't do that, mate. That sounds like a terrible idea. That's worse than ever now. It's more volatile than ever. And we already know AI overviews are more volatile than ever, right? And they take up so much of the initial page load, that initial screen, that initial viewport. Before the fold, you basically get ads, you get a map pack, you get carousels, you get AI overviews that contain all of those things as well. And now AI overviews have ads in them as well. For me, to kind of balance it the other way around, it's more about that visibility on the SERP than actually that first position. I think the value of that number one organic ranking is lower than it's basically ever been.
Yeah, totally. I completely, again, and that's so right. I had a recent example this week, actually, where we've had a client that's been with us for a long time. And I've only recently in the last sort of year or so actually taken the account on from someone who's left the organization. And because they've been with us for such a long time, and the SEO world has changed so much, whereas they still had a mentality that was imprinted upon them. Then it was all about number one, and user intent wasn't really it was a thing, but it was less of a thing, and it was a bit more grey and murky. And I've kind of had to, they were, and hey, I'll be honest, might still be on the precipice of leaving. They're not going to get any better results anywhere else, but might be on the precipice of leaving. Because I've had to sit them down and just go, this is state of play of SEO 2025.
Yeah.
And I'm really sorry that it's not 10 years ago. But this is the way that it's changed. But I have a better chance of retaining them if they understand that than trying to bullshit them and lie to make them say, don't worry about it, we'll get you back number one and it'll be absolutely fine, because it's just not going to happen.
That ties back to what we were just talking about, right? Like we don't know what's happening with AI mode. I have not touched it. I saw, I know Noah Lerner from the SEO community and Sterling Sky was doing live demos on a podcast and a webinar the other day. And I was like, oh, that's what it looks like. That's the first, it occurred to me, that's the first time I've actually seen it moving that isn't an official GIF in a presentation from Google, right? Like actually seeing query fan out happen in real time, actually seeing the process and all that kind of stuff. And like, it kind of looks like ChatGPT. Like, yeah, there's a reason for that because OpenAI caught Google with their pants down. That's why. Yes. That's why last year's I/O was AI, integrating Gemini. Like, yeah, we get it, Sundar, we get it. But there's a real element there, I think, of open, honest communication again. And so many, we were having a conversation with a client the other day that was like, the US tariffs have massively affected our manufacturing and stuff. We need to fundamentally restructure how we approach our production, and that will massively affect our budgets. That will massively affect our employees, suppliers, everything. And tiny little things like that can make such a big difference. And then you have the conversation of like, right, let's have this open, honest conversation of, if your strategy is make stuff so that we rank for huge search volume keywords, cool, good luck to you. Me and Tom and the team will go and outrank you plenty of times, right? Like, We'll be the ones driving the revenue and the traffic and getting more clients and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think there's a real like maturation of the industry that's happened over the last 5-10 years or so. So I've been 7 or 8 years, give or take now. It's a bit wobbly because I kind of accidentally did SEO at an in-house job years ago. And I was like, oh, I guess that is SEO. Okay, cool. So I don't really have like an official start date of like my first day in the agency or anything like that. So about 8 years or so. And it was a real thing where seeing it evolve and again, paying attention to conversations, speaking to people like you two who have been in the industry longer, people like Mark, people like other people who've been around. I remember speaking to Steve Payne from Systrix, the marketing manager there, who was like, I've been doing SEO since before the internet was really a thing. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, yeah, well, it was like archives and stuff. And I'm like, what you've like categorizing encyclopedias and stuff? It's like, well, no, but I'm literally working like in a server room with data, like actual databases to categorize stuff so people can find stuff more easily. I'm like, I guess that is search optimization. That's a weird way of thinking about it. Like, I've been doing SEO longer than Google has, kind of like melted my brain a little bit,
I like the idea that he was like, I was hoping you were going to say, I was the guy that gave that barbershop the idea of calling his business like A. Milner Barbers, just so that I could be right at the very front of the yellow pages when you do it. I think that person is the caveman founder of SEO, whoever came up with that idea.
Yeah, when you have like Arthur A. Aardvark, you're like, oh, that's SEO, mate. You're first page right there. That's position 1 right there, baby. That's what we.
If there was one piece of advice that you could give to someone that was starting in their SEO career right now, what would that be?
Find people you can trust to learn from, which kind of ties back into the community side of things, right?
Yeah.
I think for me, even before I joined Candor, I'm always a very active consumer of things. And we were talking about earlier, right? We are both huge advocates of podcasts and this whole audio, now video medium, and have been for many, many years. I freaked out my co-host of my podcast, the Sequelizers podcast, the other day. We were talking about, how do you spend your time? My co-host Matt goes to the cinema 3 to 5 times a week, every single week for the last 20 years of his life. Like, film is his thing. Like, most people think I'm a film buff because I host a film podcast. Most people think I'm Matt, but Matt is like, he remembers every film you've ever heard of and can describe the poster and has a review of it that he's done on his website since he was like 14 years old. And he's now in his 40s. And it's like, yeah, there's levels to this shit, like, for me, when you find a resource that you really like, a creator you really like, somebody who's publishing interesting things, research it. Go and actually see. It might look too good to be true, but like we said, people posting, bragging stuff on LinkedIn or whatever. Verify your sources and then follow the people that you can actually say they're putting the money where their mouth is. They have real testimonials from real clients. They have real data. They have real whatever it is to prove that they know what they're talking about. Like, you can talk all day long about like, I've seen this. I think this is a ranking factor, or this is this, or whatever. What I really love is a couple of different companies who do this. So Ryan and Nick are the team over at SEO Testing, and Will Critchlow and the guys over at Search Pilot do these brilliant little A/B case studies. And I know you're nodding along here, Tom. I'm sure plenty of the listeners might be familiar with it as well. Like, they just share the data of the thing. And we don't know if it's a ranking factor, but it worked. So, does removing product descriptions from above the product image and moving it below the product image impact click-through rate? I don't know. What a weird thing to ask, but that's a really interesting question that you don't know until you try it. And I think testing stuff, getting data, and finding other people that do that and have the data to back up their claims, and then follow those people, listen to them on podcasts, listen to their talks and webinars, and follow them on LinkedIn and whatever. That's how I learned SEO, was following people like the late Bill Schlavsky as well. Like, Bill was SEO by the Sea was such a big thing for me back in the day. Of Bill was breaking down Google patents. And I'm like, I never want to read a patent in my life. But Bill was doing the Lord's work and just breaking everything down and being with his brilliant, like sardonic little wry smile, just breaking everything down. And I really appreciate people like Bill. Mark has done a nice little job of kind of picking up the baton that Bill left with. That was, we do the SEO pattern podcast now, which is just a notebook LLM thing. Like you just put into Google's notebook LM, do a podcast about this. You give it a specific prompt, tell it not to be too fluffy and stuff.
Yeah.
And then it kind of breaks down the pattern into a nice little digestible conversation. And being able to have that kind of thing and be like, oh yeah, we can prove that this is the thing that Google has. This is a pattern. This is actual, real, actual physical, like an actual piece of paper, for want of a better phrase, a PDF, whatever it is, that proves that it's probably a ranking factor. You know, there was the big leaks last year, and there were two big ones, funny enough. One discovered by the Also Ask team, funnily enough. And it was interesting seeing all that data and being like, oh, that's a weird one. I never heard of that before. And the big thing Mark really focused on in a negative way that people kept taking the wrong way was a site quality score. And I know I'm not going to spoil anything. I know he's working on a few studies at the moment and a lot of like data correlation stuff with a few other tools and stuff. But we got inundated in the Candor inbox with, hello, my website is struggling. Could you tell me what my site quality score is, please, and how I can improve it? And we were just like, that's not the point. That's not the KPI. That's not the metric. That quality, you don't know what that means. We don't know what that. Google didn't just give you a little description of like, if you go above a 0.6, you'll get 10 times the revenue. Like, that's not how that works. And when people just make claims of stuff like that, of like, oh, I built my DA from 75 to 95 and now I get 100 million clicks a week or whatever. I'm like, no, you don't. You don't even, that's a third-party arbitrary number made up by Moz or Ahrefs or SEMrush or whatever it is. That doesn't mean anything. So prove it. Like, show me the money, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, precisely that. I always say, it goes back to what we were saying before about the good and the great. Okay, so I think that the good SEOs, they're great at listening, and the good SEOs will typically listen to perhaps what Google is saying and will just fall under that prism, which is fine. You got to take that with quite a pinch of salt, and you've got to. But the great are those that then take that step further and you don't have to be the practitioner, you're not necessarily, like you're saying, you don't have to be the one that breaks down those patterns, but you have to be the ones that listens to, looks for the money, looks at the money and what is it saying and how they've broken it down, and listens to that and then assimilates their own assumptions based off what they know and see. And they are typically the ones that the great SEOs. So yeah.
And has that money been laundered is the real question.
Has that money been?
Is it counterfeit bills?
Yeah, exactly. Precisely. Yeah. And that's what TikTok is built on. So
pretty much, yeah.
So what's the biggest key lesson that you've learned in your SEO career so far, and how did you learn it?
I think this is something I may have mentioned it on podcasts before. Again, I'm usually not on this side of the mic, if that makes sense. It's weird to not be asking. I know we were talking about this before we started recording, right? Of like, oh, it's weird to have the pressure on me instead of the other way around. But I think the biggest lesson for me is not focusing on the small details of, like the example I would use, client reporting, and this is true internally or externally, whatever it is. Look at the bigger picture. Pay attention to the bigger picture. Of course, zoom in, have a look. I used the example earlier of like, what is this specific page doing? If that page matters, you probably should be paying attention. But what is the site as a whole doing? What is the domain doing? How is your work affecting the overall traffic and revenue and all the good positive things that you want to happen for a client's website? For me, I got into a bad habit, again, previous agency stuff and having conversations with a lot of the account managers here at Candor as well, that the nature of client communication, the nature of, as we talked about before, translating jargon and all that kind of stuff. You can talk about improving core web vitals and, oh, look, my INP and LCP are now 80 and 95 instead of 60 and 25. Who cares? Maybe that's very important to you. Fair enough. You do you. But understanding, actually, it's probably better to look at like year-on-year comparisons for reporting than it is month-on-month, because you get seasonality, you get things like COVID happening. I had a really funny example. So like I said, I'm still at the previous job. There was a 2020 to 2021 year-on-year comparison for a particular date. And there was an absolutely insane spike. It was, they were selling like cleaning products and stuff and hand wash. And you can see where I'm going with this. They spiked in like April of 2020. I was like, oh, that's weird. Like, oh yeah, the first lockdown was the end of March 2020. And if I hadn't have paid attention to the bigger picture, think about what is happening on the world around you, not just what is happening on my client's site, right?
Yeah.
Pay attention to that bigger picture. And I remember opening that report in front of the client on the call and being like, revenue is down by like 25 grand. I don't know why. And they went, oh, we did sell like tens of thousands of multi-packs of hand wash at this exact period last year. Like, let me just filter products. Hold on one sec. And just type, click. Yeah, when I filter that out, we're up by 7 grand, don't worry. And they're like, oh, well, thank God for that. Like, there was a real sigh of relief as I kind of realized on the fly what was happening. So that was a real learning moment for me of like, be aware of what you're about to say and don't forget to look at the bigger picture, because you might get something that will help in the long run, right? When you're looking at the long run, SEO is a long game. I know it might not be true for very much longer with how volatile the SERPs are, but I still think marketing and I still think brand building and all this kind of stuff that ties into so much of digital marketing is a long game. It's a marathon, not a sprint. All the typical cliches and idioms and stuff. When it comes to that moment of realization, I was like, oh, okay, do I need to pay attention to the really, really little specific bits? Are we just focusing on one particular category of pages, or do we care about the whole site? What is the industry doing right now? Oh, by the way, every year this industry goes on break for 3 months. You know?
Yeah.
Well, that explains why nobody's buying everything every September, October, November. If you don't pay attention to that, you don't know that. Pay attention to that kind of stuff. Even if it's zooming out from your client site and looking at literally what's happening around the world, like pandemics and tariffs and political changes and stuff like that, they can be really important when it comes to driving and increasing and decreasing marketing numbers. So yeah, don't focus on the little things. Pay attention to the big picture, basically.
Zoom out.
And don't do what I did and freak out at a client meeting.
Do you know what? I've done exactly this. I've definitely done exactly the same thing in the past, you know, so because sometimes you just do get absolutely crazy spikes. I remember a client of ours that just sold during a similar period, millions of pounds, and I mean millions and millions of pounds worth of randomly, they were smoke detectors. And the reason was because new legislation came out. So new legislation came out in an area. It was Scotland, I think, might have been Wales, can't remember. And new legislation. So everyone went crazy for these smoke detectors because they needed these to comply. So they sold millions of them. And if you don't take that zoom out, then you're going to look like £6 million down, like you just you did on that client. And then you kind of, so yeah, absolutely zoom out. And when I'm talking to new people, you know, in SEO, like we were talking about earlier, sometimes that's the key thing because they can get very zoomed in to the minutiae and the detail. And sometimes the real art is being able to zoom out and take a look at the big picture. Jack, it has been an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for talking to me and just demystifying just a little bit for everybody out there listening this weird and wonderful world of SEO for us. And thank you so much for being my first guest on. It's been an honor. I love you so much. It's untrue.
Love you
and
too,
like
buddy.
I say,
Love you too.
We will. I swear. I know we say this every 2.5 years.
We will share a drink at some point.
We'll share a drink at some point, and probably the next morning end up on a radio show. That's my. That's my
there
aim
we go.
together.
That's how we start our own radio show, Tom. That's the plan.
No, but thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Been a pleasure, mate. It's genuinely lovely to chat with you again. And hopefully, my answers were reasonably time sensitive and timeless, that they're not just completely destroyed as soon as Google changes something and it all goes horribly wrong.
I think no, your answers have been absolutely timeless, but also time sensitive, because you are right that we're in a seismic shift, which is, I know, is very sensitive to you at the moment, because you've literally been recently in a seismic shift. So we are in a seismic shift area of SEO right now. So no, your answers are absolutely perfect.
Thank you, man. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and yeah, enjoyed doing a new podcast. I think this is really cool. I love the angle of like taking the set questions, and I'd be interested to, funny enough, this is now giving you an extra job, get some data of like what's the most common types of answers for each question over the next year of this show, over the next 2 years of this show, whatever it is. Like, what are the kind of things people are saying when it comes to those set questions? I'd be very intrigued.
You this is why you've got such a beautiful mind, Jack, because you know exactly what I'm trying to do. You know why I've done it this way, because in 2 years' time, after I've done 250 of these bad boys, I'm going to have the biggest survey of these answers, which is just going to be invaluable. No, that's exactly what I intend to do. It's going to be, and it's going to be really, really interesting. And you're the first drop of that pint glass of drink that we will inevitably have one day in Brighton.
It's an honor to be the first guest on, mate. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to Jack Chambers-Ward for being my first guest on this debut episode of SEO Is Not Voodoo. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please go and subscribe, write a review, comment on our socials, do all that stuff. I'll be back next time with a new guest, and I'll be asking the exact same questions. Maybe we'll start to see what patterns and secrets reveal themselves. Thanks for listening and watching. Till next time.